Hello, everybody, and welcome to Vinyl Power. That's right, the podcast where we talk about our love for vinyl records and share it with you. Join us each week as we bring you the latest in vinyl releases, what's in our vinyl collection, and wrap it up with epic vinyl. That's right here, each and every week, with your hosts, the Reverend Jeff Kelly and Kurt Harris. Once again, welcome to Vinyl Power. Welcome, everybody, back to Vinyl Power. That's right, the first week of December. That's right. It's going to be a wonderful Yuletide season. I'm not sure about you, but I'm a little curious as to what Santa's thinking there up behind Rudolph. That's kind of a creepy image. Wow. Welcome, everybody, to Vinyl Power, the podcast. That's right. We are here talking about vinyl records. Look at that. I'm getting there we go. Oh, nope, that won't work out. Better. Yeah, one of those instances where you're going bald and you've got like 6 strands of hair out of whack. Anyhow, I'm the Reverend Jeff Kelly, and we're talking here about our love for vinyl records. And over there is the great Kurt, the Music Man Harris from North Carolina. How you doing, sir?
Doing excellent here on the first week of December, our first December Vinyl Power podcast. There's nowhere I would rather be than with the Ayatollah of rock and roller himself here in the holiday season, the Reverend Jeff Kelly.
The Ayatollah of rock and roller. That's right. Yeah, I know that was a bald, weird, straggly-haired guy. That was not me in the Road Warrior, by the way. Hey, this is the part of the show where we talk about the new releases that are coming up. You'll see them out there in the Facebook groups as early as tomorrow. Just a few releases this week. Bad Books with Yeah. Beastie Boys with a triple release of Hot Sauce Committee Part 2, the In Sound from Way Out, and To the Five Boroughs, all coming out tomorrow at your local record shops. You can run right down and get your copies. You know what I like about these when they come out too is the fact that it drives a lot of the originals back into the stores. I don't know why that happens. Like, people give up their originals because they bought the reissue. I'm not really sure, but I love the fact that they do. Motion City Soundtrack, Even If It Kills Me Deluxe. Tears for Fears, Rule the World, their greatest hits.
Oh, that's probably a good one.
Probably really good. And the various artists are releasing the BoJack Horseman original soundtrack. Really? Is that how desperate we're getting to have vinyl records? As we just have to make
BoJack Horseman original soundtrack.
The BoJack Horseman original soundtrack. He works. Yeah, it's crazy. Whatever floats your boat. And that,
I do hear that's popular on Netflix. I never tried it myself, but I have heard that people do like it.
Yeah, our buddy Cole has mentioned it on What You Watching a few times, that he's watching the season series, and it must be one of those things. Hey, Kurt, I got a question for you, man. What you been spending this week on those platters, man?
Well, you know what? I always bring a theme, and this week the theme was hard and heavy. It wasn't metal, but it was hard and heavy. And when you're talking hard and heavy, how could you be talking anything more than, yes, Jimmy Page, John Paul Jones, Robert Plant, and John Bonham, Led Zeppelin. So I've already had Led Zeppelin 1 on here as one of my epic albums, so I'm just going to start this right off with Led Zeppelin 2. And I just have you know right from the beginning, these are all the Jimmy Page remixes that were released in 2015. Some people did not really like them. I was a little hesitant. I bought them all. I own every one of them. But I love them. I think they're fantastic. This happens to be the ultimate special edition of what could be Led Zeppelin's heaviest record, Led Zeppelin 2. And it has the extra. It's a trifold, as you can see, and it has the extra album with a bunch of outtakes. Really cool record. They're 180 gram, really well put together packages. And how can you beat Whole Lot of Love? What is and what should never be? The Lemon Song,
Lemon
Squeeze
song.
My Lemon. Uh, Thank You, Heartbreaker, Living, Loving, Maid, Ramble On, Moby Dick, and Bring It On Home. Just a spectacular album. And as we know, this is 1969. Um, a few just quick interesting things about this album. Number one in the US, and when it went number one in the US, it supplanted the Beatles' Abbey Road. So the Beatles' Abbey Road was number one, and when this was released, it took over the number one spot, also number one in the UK. And the one last kind of interesting thing about this album, and this seems like kind of a theme with Led Zeppelin that I didn't really know beforehand, parts of this record were recorded in 13 different studios. Kind of hard to believe it's as coherent and well put together it is when you read the listing of studios that they use to get this together. But overall, it's along with Led Zeppelin one of my favorite records, and it could be about their heaviest record. Certainly a great way to start my week, and of course, what better way to follow that than to come right with Led Zeppelin 3. Led Zeppelin 3, of course, when it came out, in many ways was a controversial record. I mean, it jumped right to number one just because people, Led Zeppelin 3, they hadn't really heard it yet. And then they heard it and they're like, it came out kind of right like 2 weeks after the first Crosby, Stills and Nash record, which, as we know, was a very acoustic record, and this was a very acoustic record. And some people said, "Oh, it's kind of just like a copy of what Crosby, Stills, and Nash were doing." Well, of course it wasn't. It's still Led Zeppelin, but it does have a very folk acoustic appeal. I happen to love this record. I love that it's different. I would not want every Led Zeppelin record to sound the same. Absolutely not. I'm glad they went in a different direction from the first two records. I won't say I like it better than the first two, but I absolutely love it. Just an amazing song listing. This is, again, the Jimmy Page special edition. And in fact, it's so tight in the plastic that I keep these in. I was going to pull it out and unfold it for you because it's also a trifold, but I can't even pull it out of the plastic. So I will leave it. I will leave it be. It's so tight in there. Anyways, Led Zeppelin 3 and 1970. It did debut at number one, but unlike the other Led Zeppelin albums, it quickly fell just because people were didn't know what to think. Moving on from there, this one is not a trifold, but it is a gatefold, and it is one that Jeff owns and has also talked about.
Absolutely.
And that is Led Zeppelin 4. Some people call it Zozo, which was the
there's a lady in red.
Exactly. The symbol that was used, each one of the band members had some kind of a symbol. You can call it a cult, you can call it whatever you want, but each band member had a symbol, and Jimmy Page's was Zoso. And I won't go into where that actually comes from because it's
the demonic possessor Zozo. All the paranormal shows are talking about Zozo nowadays. Everybody knows who Zozo is. Well, it's not a mystery anymore.
It's actually like Zothansis or something like that, and it's actually from one of Aleister Crowley's books. Since Jimmy Page had read a lot of Aleister Crowley's books, and as we know, he bought Boleskine House there on, which was one of Aleister Crowley's old homes, actually on Loch Ness. So kind of an interesting location and an interesting house. And I've always loved Jimmy Page. He redid these albums. He certainly doesn't seem like the kind of person to be scared of in any way, but I think he's one of the absolute guitar geniuses of any time period. I mean, going to today, going back through his time period, I mean, the guy was absolutely amazing. He produced these albums. And as we know, this album itself, Led Zeppelin 4, and actually it came out unnamed because Jimmy Page was a little bit upset. He took it personal that Led Zeppelin 3 was not received as well. He thought it would be very well received, and it wasn't. He actually took it personally, put this one out without a title, and it's 1971. This album, and people would probably know this because it has Stairway to Heaven on it, but in the USA, This is the third highest selling album of all time in
Next
America.
to Thriller, and what
I'm
else?
sure Thriller. Well, Dark Side of the Moon has got to be way up there too. So I was very interested when I read that. I made sure to go back over it to be positive what
Because
I was
Thriller
reading.
is the absolute number one highest sold album in United States history ever.
Yeah, I know that's a huge seller. I know Dark Side of the Moon is a huge seller. That one Eagles album was a huge seller. But they do list this as the third
Oh,
highest sales ever.
nice.
I read it
Well,
tonight,
it's an
just to be
amazing,
sure.
album. I mean, anybody
Um,
who loves rock and roll and doesn't know Led Zeppelin needs a head examination. But if they know Led Zeppelin and you don't have this album, well, then you don't really know Led Zeppelin, because this is, I think, their culmination. The whole album just brings the whole picture together of everything they were trying to do. Like I said, I liked studio debuts because you get a real feel for who the musicians really were
right.
before the studio gets their grubby little hands on them. And then 2 and 3 were exactly that. They were appeasing what the studio wanted because they came out like back to back. They just wanted more albums to come. This didn't come for 2 years.
Well,
They took their time with this one, and I felt like they went back into their own musicianship instead of appeasing what the record company wanted. They gave us what they thought they wanted.
well, this one is 1971. A few little interesting things about it. I had talked about the Jethro Tull Aqualung album recently, and of course, this album was recorded at the same time at the same place. And what wound up happening was they got a little bit frustrated with Jethro Tull being in the same building, basically recording at the same time. And they were, I guess, they must have been friendly with members of the band Fleetwood Mac. And Fleetwood Mac had just been recording the early Fleetwood Mac before Stevie Nicks and who's the guitar player? Her buddy, the guitar player with Fleetwood Mac. Great. He's actually a very good guitar player. Buckingham, Lindsey Buckingham.
That's the one.
Yeah, before they had joined, so the early, I guess, Peter Green Fleetwood Mac, they said, hey, why don't you head over to Headley Grange? We just finished there. It's off in the woods. It's just loaded. It's surrounded by gardens. It's so peaceful. And that's where they went. And so they wound up leaving Island Studios. We're recording right next to Jethro Tull's Aqualung, heading out to Headley Grange. And Jimmy Page said they would go off and have tea in the afternoon and sit outside in the garden and go back in and finish recording. And it said it made for one of the most productive recording sessions they had ever done as a band. And then the other interesting thing I would say about this album is, as popular as it is, you know what? I haven't looked up to find out what kept it from being number one. It was number one in the UK, but it only reached number 2 in the US, which is sort of interesting, having one of the biggest, maybe the biggest radio song of all time in Stairway to Heaven. So it's interesting that this one did not reach number 1, but it held at number 2 the longest of any album ever on the US charts, 90 weeks at number 2, but not 1. They just, well, a little interesting factoid about that one. And then for the fourth, you know, how can you beat, of course,
The House of the Holy.
Houses of the Holy. And again, this is the Jimmy Page remix, remaster. I remember I could hardly get this one into the plastic. Oh, I got it. Yes, I was able to slide this one out. I believe this one is also one of the dreaded. I believe it is. If it's not, yes, it is. It is, and it's got this enormous cool picture. And of course, if you do just want to open it and get out the actual record to listen to it, you do only have to open here and get the record out. And then the other one, it has all the outtakes and different bits and pieces that were not on this record. This is 1973. This was a new way of recording for Led Zeppelin. They used different new layering techniques. Of course, as in many other records, some of which I own, this cover was banned in the US because of naked rear end. And one sort of interesting thing was that I did not know until recently, which was this, this cover was actually inspired by the Arthur C. Clarke novel Childhood's End. And I had never known that before. But anyways, that's kind of where the cover came from. And this was Led Zeppelin's final release on Atlantic Records before they started their own record label, which of course was Swan Song. And as we know, the first band they signed to their own label was Bad Company.
Bad Company till the day I die.
Exactly. And this record did go to #1 in the US, #1 in the UK. I happen to love this record with, songs like No Quarter. It's an interesting record because it actually Led Zeppelin delves into, for the first time, a little bit of reggae and a little bit of different sounds, a little bit of funk. But I think it's a great record. And it's one, obviously, it's prominently displayed in the movie. The song remains the same movie, of course. Right. Anyways, that's where I was listening this week, and those were the 4 records that I actually listened to more than once. And so I have to ask you, Ayatollah of Rock and Rolla, our most mighty holiday ambassador, what records were you spinning this week on all of your vintage equipment?
Oh, dude, ridiculous amounts of vintage around here right now. But, people are going to give me crap about this, but I don't really care because it is rock and roll. I've been hanging out with John Cougar Mellencamp all week long. You betcha.
A little ditty about Jack and Diane.
Jack and Diane. That's absolutely right. People give us crap about John Cougar till you put it on, and then they're like, oh, that's him? Yeah, that's him. There's every single album I'm going to talk about tonight had a #1 single come out of it. The #1 single that came off of the John Cougar self-titled John Cougar was I Need a Lover. And that was a 5-minute and 35-minute track, which of course we all know that radio stations absolutely hated. 1979, so he's right. He's out there jamming with Kiss and Judas Priest. He's been, and this wasn't his original. He still had it was 2 albums before this. 1976 was his original debut. So Cougar's been in it a whole lot longer than people really want to give him credit for. And I don't really care because I absolutely love most of the stuff that he has absolutely done. The next one up I wanted to talk about was the Nothing Matters and What If It Does. The big hit that came out of this one, of course, was the Peppermint Twist, written by Henry Glover. It was sorry, I lost my place in my note there for a moment. The 4 studio album, of course, Ain't Even Done With the Night was one of the other, which reached number 17.
Ain't Even Done With the Night.
Yep, that's the one that hit Billboard Top 100, number 17 on this one, as well as the Peppermint Twist going all the way to the top. But the next album is just the hard-hitting, well, the American Fool, the 5th studio album by John Mellencamp, 1982. Holding the #1 position on the Billboard Art chart for 9 weeks straight. It was 1982's best-selling album. So obviously, I wasn't the only person buying Mellencamp in '82, but it had the #1 hits "Hurt So Good" and "Jack and Diane" on the same album back to back. So I mean, you can't really go wrong with picking up a copy of American Fool by John Mellencamp. I mean, it's just the Cougar. Daddy gets a little weird on us. He brings us the next one I wanted to talk about was 1983. The 7th studio album. It got as high as #9 on the Billboard 200. There were 3 top hits on this one. Crumbling Down, Pink Houses, and God, what was the third one? Oh, the acoustic version of Pink Houses. They're counting in Pink Houses twice. Okay, great. Isn't that freaking one? I was like, that should have only been 2 on this one. This one kind of lost me. It's fun. Don't get me wrong. It's John Mellencamp. You can sit down and bob your head to it and do whatever it is. It just doesn't bring away a whole lot of memories in the end of it. But the last one I wanted to bring up, of course, was Scarecrow.
Yes.
Yeah, the the eighth studio album, released September 1985. It peaked number 2, the U.S. chart, behind Heart's comeback album, Heart. That's, there's a remastered version released in May of 2005 on Mercury as well. And it has 3 number 1 hits on it. Small Town, which is, Lonely All Night, and ROCK in the USA. I mean, there's absolutely no way to go wrong with this album, front to back. It's just seriously fun to sit around and listen to. So the Ayatollah rock and roll went with a little bit of pop rock, I guess you'd call it, this week, and that's still rock and roll to me.
Well, I saw John Cougar. I had no idea who he was. He opened for, I want to say it was Heart, but it was when his first album came out. I'd never heard of him. This guy comes out on the stage, John Cougar Mellencamp. He's wearing green elf shoes. And when I say elf shoes, I'm talking about shoes where the toe curls. Right? Like you see, perfect for Christmas, right? And he's wearing green elf shoes. And I'll tell you what, I mean, now it might not be totally my kind of music, but it was back in the day when you got to stand. So I was standing right down front, surrounded by huge dudes with beards and bicycle chains on their wallets and the heavy duty biker leather jackets. And when he was finished, this big dude, I'm a big dude, this guy was bigger than me. He turned to his buddy next to him, standing right in front of me. He had tears in his eyes. And he looked at his buddy and he said, "This is the second coming of Mick Jagger." This guy was incredible. And I will never forget that reaction. So absolutely no problem with spinning a bunch of John Cougar Mellencamp.
Doesn't Mick Jagger have to be dead before he can have a second coming?
Well, who knows what the rumors might have been at that time, but
I got to ask you, buddy, what'd you bring along for your epic record this week, sir?
Well, I'll tell you what. Obviously, I stayed in the Led Zeppelin theme, and for my epic record this week, I went for Physical Graffiti, Led Zeppelin's only double vinyl release.
Now, they stole that album sleeve idea from the girls' sleeve. I swear to God, it's like, you know what I'm talking about.
You're talking about, well, no, this is before Some Girls. This is 1975. I believe Some Girls is 77 or 78. But they are very similar, you're right, because, yes, it depends which sleeve you put in, right, as to which
comes up in the windows.
Yeah, and this one, it only opens, it has the 2 records, but it opens from the top, which I kind of like, actually.
Yeah.
And both records are in there in their separate sleeves. 1975, again, this is the Jimmy Page remix. I did buy all of them, the first record all the way through Presence. I don't worry about Coda. But yeah, this is the first one on Swan Song. And about that with Swan Song, one of the interesting things was when they started to go in and lay down tracks for this record, it actually, the tracks, I guess it's one of the reasons it wound up being 2 records. The tracks wound up being recorded over a space of about 2 years. And when they went in to actually finalize this, they signed Bad Company to Swan Song Records and gave up their studio to Bad Company. So they actually started recording, left the studio. Bad Company entered the studio to record that first, obviously great first Bad Company record. And Led Zeppelin re-entered the studio after Bad Company was done to finish up what would become Physical Graffiti. And as everybody knows, I love all 4 sides of this record, but I think, the side that has In My Time of Dying, Custard Pie, and The Rover, that, to me, that's one of the best sides ever. I mean, you put on that side and it's what is it, I believe Into My Time of Dying, I believe, is the 3rd song, and The Rover is I think the 2nd song, and Custard Pie is I think possibly the 1st, or The Rover's the 1st. But regardless, those 3 songs on one side are absolutely amazing. It's just an amazing side of the album. When you flip that one, obviously you get the song Houses of the Holy, which is interesting since there was an album. That's why I said actually that some of the songs off this actually come from different years that made up this record. but the final song, Kashmir. And, you know, we all know just what a fantastic song to Kashmir is, to just sit and, well,
Jam. Yeah, just
yeah, I mean, just
enjoy.
totally, yeah, close your eyes and become one with the sound. So Kashmir is definitely one of those songs. Um, but I also love the side that, you know, that people don't talk about as much, Bronyer, R, however you say that, and In the Light, and all of that. I think, you know, that's just as good. And it just fills out this album. And for me, makes this, you know, the first record on their own label, Swan Song, and just makes us truly, every Led Zeppelin album is epic. You talk about the presence, you talk about, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, Physical Graffiti, um, In Through the Outdoor. I love them all. I love that they're all different. I have a recent new appreciation for the presence. I had kind of avoided it for a long time, but a few of my buddies kept saying, no, get into it. And I went ahead, and it was the last one I purchased of the Jimmy Page remixes, and just fantastic record. So yeah, for this week, it was all Led Zeppelin. And it's almost hard to pick one epic record from Zeppelin, but I figured, hey, make it the first Swan Song record. And of course, you know, it was their sixth record. It went to #1 in the US and the UK. And if you haven't spun this one in a while, certainly put this one on, and don't only listen to the side with the Rover and Custard Pie or Kashmir. Dig into that second record and dig into In the Light and all those other great tunes that they put together on that second record. And you won't be disappointed. Jimmy Page is a pure genius, amazing band. John Bonham, in his time period, along with Keith Moon, as far as I'm concerned, the two best drummers I've ever heard. They're vastly different, but I love them both for, you know, for what they were. So my epic record was Led Zeppelin, Physical Graffiti.
Physical.
And so I have to ask you, Reverend Jeff, oh, person who leads us to the promised land of holiday Christmas, what epic record are you going to bring to the table as we sail closer and closer to Santa coming down the chimney and filling our stockings for all the good boys and girls?
Well, you know, it's going to be that time of year, and everybody loves the stories. So, of course, I finally had to bring it to the table. That's right. Rudolph, the red-nosed reindeer. However, this is not the version that you think that this is. Now, this has on side one of it, Rudolph, the red-nosed reindeer, the voices of Walter Schumann. And that's where it's different. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, as told by Paul Wing with Russ Case and his orchestra, is the second one. And then Frosty the Snowman by Vaughn Monroe and his orchestra. Then on side T, it's not the Pearl Ives one, which is really what I like about it. The Night Before Christmas song by Giselle McKenzie with Ray Charles in his orchestra and chorus, as well as Rudolph's Second Christmas, as told by Paul Wing, with music composed and conducted by Norman Layden. And then Dale Evans, the great Dale Evans, sings us Susie Snowflake. Just delightful. It brings back childhood like everything should. Now this is the stereo remastered from the mono. I kind of wish I had the mono pressing of it, to be honest with you. The dragging stereo from a mono pressing is kind of strange. It doesn't really do anything but kind of split the signal into unintelligible weirdness at times. But hey, whatever. They didn't know what they were doing in 1968. Screw it. To be honest with you, all the stories and the songs that are on here are just things that remind me of better times. And that's one of the reasons that I love sitting around listening to the Christmas music. I mean, the wife and I have a ton of FLAC files that I've downloaded, but I find that we sit around and listen to the vinyl so much more than we put on those digital files. I don't know why that is, but I guess I just love the sound of the turntable playing You know, I that's just, I always have. So that's what I brought along with me. I could not find a Wikipedia page to actually bring a whole lot more information about this. Actually, it was 1965. I did bring the Discogs page up, but there just isn't. RCA Camden was who it was released by. Originally released in Canada in the mono format in 1958. And then this stereo edition came out in 1965. And that's really just about all the information I could find on it. But thank God for secondhand record stores, because I now have a copy of something that I don't think that there's probably a whole lot of out there. And I paid $2 for it.
Well, you can't beat that. I mean, obviously, like you said, it's not specifically about where it came from, when it came from. It's about the feeling. You put that record on, and it takes you to a good place.
That's exactly it. Well, and speaking of things that take you to a place, it's that sad walking away music that we at the end of every episode. Yeah, Christmas season is just around the bend. We've got a live presentation coming up for you here in a week or so, maybe 2. We'll see how that works out. Some live interviews coming for you in the new season. And you never know who's going to show up around here on Vinyl Power. Check us out at Vinyl Power Podcast on Facebook. You can leave us messages. You can tell us what you're spinning. Click the subscribe button. Hit the little bell up there if you like what we do here. That way you get notified when we're doing it again. Thursdays, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, right here via the YouTube. Thank you so much, Kurt. I love that you do this with me. For our all of 25 fans for now. But it's growing. We need 100 fans to name the channel. Things get a whole lot better when we name the channel. We'll see you next week, guys.